Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So you're tying it back now. Um, it feels it's a little more professional, I guess.
I don't know. I've gotten so much guff about my hair. It's so weird. One thing I've learned, years ago, Tucker Carlson, when he quit wearing a bow tie, he said that he didn't realize it at the time, but wearing a bow tie is like having a middle finger around your neck. And I've discovered that having long hair really offends people, and I'm not sure why, but it really does.
I two things I want to say about that. Number one, I'm not convinced Tucker Carlson is really worried about having a middle finger dangling around his neck. That kind of seems like who he wants to be in life. Let me tell you a long hair story. So when I was a teenager, I had long hair, and it was the 80s, the Reagan era, and at least where I went to school, no boy in my class had long hair. I was the only one, and it created this visceral reaction with people.
Yeah.
That how dare I flaunt societal norms by doing this, and people would just badger me all the time. I did some plays, and like the directors, so I was playing like the dad in Bye Bye Birdie, and it was like, you can't have long hair and play the dad in Bye Bye Birdie. I was like, well, I'll just tie it back and pin it up. And they're like, no, you gotta sacrifice for the show and cut your hair for the show. I'm like, nope, not doing it. And then when I was a senior, I was taunting the gym teacher. And I said to him, if I can beat you in a game on one-on-one, then I should get out of gym for the rest of the year. And he said, all right, but if I win, you have to cut your hair. I thought about that. It was like this, because especially when you're a kid, your hair is really your identity,
Didn't Homer Simpson say that once?
Yeah. When you're a teenager or a cartoon character, it's both true. This was this philosophical dilemma. Like, okay, your hair is really important to you, but that's just symbolic. Like getting out of gym, like that's a tangible good. Wouldn't you risk your hair to get out of gym for the rest of the year? That's a big deal. I said, okay, I'll do it. And then this got out. This got out in the whole school. And it snowballed into a Friday night event that was going to be the pregame for the varsity basketball game. And we had a school that had terrible sports teams. Like no one would ever go to a sports ball thing on a Friday. That just never happened. But everyone was abuzz that there would be this game where Bill Scher might have to cut his hair. And so this got
That's great press for you, man.
So this got up to the principal's office, where they were like, there is no way you get a gym class. Like, you're going to have to change the terms of this deal. I forget what they try to make like a donation to charity or something or other. But the gym teacher's like, don't worry, Bill. If you win, we'll do the deal. Don't worry about it. And so literally, like the rafters were packed. Like there's never been a sporting event at my school where it was like a sold out event. It was like a sold out event. And I was really, being a showboat. I came with like pink spandex and no shirt and a green Axl Rose bandana. And I had like warm up music, and I'm like,
wait, is there a video? Does video exist of this?
This is before the smartphone era, so there's no evidence. I can't prove the story is true. And I was so worked up, I tired myself out on the warm up. But the very first play, I had a fadeaway baseline jumper, nothing but net. 1-0 Bill Scher. Crowd goes wild. And then the gym teacher got 11 straight points, and I lost 11-1. And my now wife was assigned the job of cutting my hair on the spot.
Wait, so this was like in the WWF, there used to be like Brutus the Barber Beefcake. There were like wrestling matches, right? Where you would, if you lost, they would shave your head on, yeah.
This ravenous school mob piled into the center of the court. And my now wife and I had to be like push through the sea of people to get to the center of the court. The principal got the first cut. It's like a public hanging. The bloodthirsty mass is so much wanted my hair to be cut. That's how far it went.
So that should have told you everything you need to know about the dangers of the mob. Now, were you completely shaven? Like
no,
shaven?
I end up with kind of a skater cut.
Okay. Okay, well, that's better than nothing. No, I've really been surprised, and I don't know if I think it's a combination of factors. I think some of it is that if people have a picture of you in their head, you can't deviate from that. I think some of it might also be a matter of age. You know, like maybe like long hair is a young Bill Scher's move, like a high school Bill Scher's move. Like my kids have taken to saying I'm an old hippie. And I had to tell them, like, if you go back and listen to that Bellamy Brothers song, he turned 35, you know, like the song about the song I'm talking about.
I don't actually.
He's an old hippie. The guy's 35 in the song. So, I mean, you know, come on, what's old these days? You know, it's this, you know, if we were back in the old days, you and I would probably be packing it up about now. But Tom Brady could be out there, you know, winning Super Bowls if he wanted to. So come on.
But anyway, you look good. We should get down to business. We can talk about hair all day long, I know, but we should get down to business. Well,
I think we should talk more about that great movie with Matt Damon and Barbara Streisand. Let me just say, I watched The Wolf of Wall Street the last couple days.
Another great Matt Damon film.
Yeah. No, that one actually is Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and you could tell because he looks really different. Speaking of people whose looks have changed.
I haven't seen it. Is that good?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's worth seeing. You know, the first half of it is you know, it's sort of hard to watch because this guy on his way up is engaging in all sorts of like really debaucherous behavior, and he's kind of just getting rewarded for being just a bad person. But of course, he gets taken, you know, he ends up getting taken down and getting his comeuppance. Overall, I think it's a pretty good film.
All right. You know, my big social media, my big media accomplishment, what's the right word? Content accomplishment was I finished season 2 Ted Lasso.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So what did you think of the episode where the assistant coach goes out on the town? Was that not bizarre?
Yeah, that wasn't my favorite. I mean, I'm happy to see Beard get, you know, his day in the sun. Yeah. So what I read was they were planning for 10 episode seasons. Mm-hmm. And Apple was like, no, we want 12 this time. They were like, oh, great. We have a storyboard out for 10. What are we going to do for these extra 2? And so that's why they did that one to sort of meet the
But the Christmas one, which was one of the 2, I thought the Christmas episode was really good. Mm-hmm. And obviously that one was sort of just stuck in there. And then they did this one with Beard going out on the town, which I just think was super bizarre. Some people actually love it. But overall, I thought it was a bad episode. Overall, I really like Ted Lasso.
Yeah, I have two principles that are increasingly in tension. One is that I don't like it, and this is very common now. I don't like it when TV writers get antsy and throw away what worked in season one to mix it up in season two.
Yeah,
I feel like you did something good in season one. Like again, these are '80s rules. Like you got a formula, stick with your formula. I'm here for reliable comfort. Please give me more reliable.
Well, look, I think they could have milked it. You don't have to stick with it forever, but you could milk it a few years. And I think I know where you're going with this. Ted Lasso was so refreshing because he was such a nice guy, which I think is really out of keeping for any football coach. I mean, there are football coaches who are nicer than others, but I don't really think he went to some championship in college as a American football team. I don't really think that's plausible that you could be that nice, but whatever. And then now they're building up the possibility that his demeanor is just the product of suppressing trauma, which I think, the danger there is that it undermines the fact that he's actually a nice guy, which I think is why everyone kind of loved him and loved the show.
It makes it more complicated character, and it's more challenging for the audience. And too many people would argue, and I'm not disagreeing with them, that makes it for a more rich and complex and satisfying show. And this goes to my other principle that is in conflict with the first principle, which is I hate overanalyzing shows. I hate people who nitpick every episode and dissect everything to an inch of death. And it's like, look, if you buy into a show, buy into the show. Enjoy the show. If you don't like the show anymore, then stop watching. Go watch something else. So I've committed. I'm in for the long haul. There's
it's a Hulu show loosely based on Catherine the Great. I recommend it. Before we move on, Bill, you and I, we really have to talk about Howard Hesseman. I think Dr. Johnny Fever.
Yes.
We lost. I don't know if I just had lunch with Mom yesterday. Mom and two of my aunts. Bob Evans.
Bob Evans, nice.
Stay connected. And I had this conversation with them, and the question is have there been more celebrities die in the last 2 months than in history, or have I just reached an age where it's hitting home to me? Because
it's the latter.
The people who are dying are people. It's not like I don't know, like Bing Crosby died in 1992, but I was like, well, the guy's a million years old. Like I have no connection to Bing Crosby. But now with Dr. Johnny Fever, it's really hitting home.
The childhood heroes are going down, which is always more unsettling. I mean, celebrities have always died. That's not a new phenomenon. Celebrities die.
It seems like a lot of them. But Howard Hesseman, and particularly you and I have talked a lot over the years about WKRP in Cincinnati. I don't know, Bill, thoughts?
Well, if you go back to, we talked about My Turkeys Away innovation, because what you could get on Amazon Prime and other streaming services is not the pristine episode because they had copyright issues with some of the songs. But you can find, and there's a key scene that's either, butchered completely or modified, which involves the song Dogs by Pink Floyd. And it's really integral it's only integral to the scene. The scene is integral to the show. Because you take that scene out or you dilute it, the setup is really hampered.
Yeah.
It's really in the first half of the episode. It's really the pinnacle of how out of touch and out of sorts the big guy has become.
Yeah.
That he walks,
and then the whole show. Before I'll just put a pin in that for 1 second. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill. The whole premise, the initial premise of WKRP in Cincinnati is it had been a classical radio station.
Yeah.
They decide to go to a rock and roll format. They bring in Dr. Johnny Fever.
He was already there.
Okay.
He was miserable playing classical music, but he was already there.
That's interesting that he was there. They bring in Andy Travis, who's the program manager, and he wants them to play top 40 hits that are actually, what everyone's playing.
Well, rock. It's not disco, it's a rock and roll station.
Yeah. But Johnny Fever says that no, a disc jockey should get to play what he wants to play, basically.
Well, in the pilot, we learned that he was fired from a rock station because he said booger on the air.
This is Fever.
Yeah. Now he's stuck with jobs he doesn't want because he got kind of quasi blacklisted. And then once Andy Travis comes in as the new station manager, saying you can play rock and roll again, he scratches the classical music and changes his whole persona and screams booger into the microphone.
One more thing, fella babies.
Right.
Speaking of, I won't comment on the Bailey Jennifer thing because you never take the bait. But let me just say this: Andy Travis, good looking guy, and hair, a nice head of hair.
Back to hair. It's always you in the hair, Matt.
And I feel like Andy Travis probably underrated as we'll say it as a sex symbol.
Well, he was a great straight man. The best shows are always, it's like Newhart, straight man in the middle, crazy people all around him or her. That's your perfect formula. And KRP was a classic example of that. And so to go back to what I was saying about the Turkey's Way episode, when you see the full scene of the big guy walking in the studio while Johnny Fever's playing dogs, it's great acting on Johnny Fever's part. It's great restrained acting. I mean, there's Howard Hesseman, going over the top and saying booger, which is a great scene too. This is more, sort of, stone Johnny Fever, hiding behind sunglasses, raising an eyebrow, not giving the big guy what he wants. He's looking for some connection, and Johnny Fever not giving it to him. It's just a fantastic scene, and so it really mars the episode when you don't see that scene. I mean, and you see it in honor of him today.
And how do people do that, Bill?
Well, it's on YouTube. You can find that scene on YouTube. And so if you find my Twitter thread, you search me on Twitter with my name and KRP, you'll find that thread, and I have a link to the YouTube there. He
was also on a show called Head of the Class.
Great show.
Really good show. And I remember an episode. I mean, I haven't seen. I don't know if I don't think they show reruns of it anywhere. But I mean, but I watched it in real time in like the 1980s, late 80s. And I remember there was an episode I think where they went to Russia right after the fall, maybe before the fall of the Soviet Union. And I remember it was like a class trip. And I think they were trying to sell blue jeans, or some of the students had like snuck blue jeans into the maybe former Soviet Union at that point. I don't remember. Anyway,
my head of the class recall is poor because I haven't had the opportunity to rewatch those episodes, but I do remember watching the show regularly at the time.
Yeah, it was good as I recall. Anyway, I'd like to just do pop culture, but I guess we should move on.
Well, I know you want to talk Whoopi. Do you want?
We could do that.
That's a slight segue into hard politics.
So Whoopi Goldberg, basically, as far as I can tell, she believes that the Holocaust wasn't racism because Jewish people, according to Whoopi, Jewish people are white. You can't tell them apart from, regular Germans from Jewish Germans. And therefore, she believes that the Holocaust was not about race, but it was just about man's inhumanity to man. Now, of course, she misses the fact that the Nazis thought that they were a master race, and they were specifically targeting Jewish people, not based on religion, as far as I know, but based on race. And but she has been, I guess, suspended. It seems like it's not a serious thing. But I
hasn't changed this morning. I mean, I've been offline this morning. As far as she's still suspended. They haven't walked that back.
That's true. But I don't think she's in any jeopardy of being terminated or anything like that. But I have actually seen several conservatives on Twitter defending her, saying that she's ignorant. she's wrong, but that she's not being anti-Semitic by what she's saying. She just happens to be wrong about it. But Bill, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, number one, there's really just at its core, a semantic argument with obviously highly charged, undercurrents. But she wasn't trying to suggest that the Holocaust didn't happen, that it didn't involve Jews, that's been overhyped. She wasn't doing any of that kind of Holocaust denial or Holocaust minimizing kind of stuff. She just thought that since Jews are white and Aryans are white, that's not a race thing. It's a different kind of evil. She called it evil.
Yes.
So there was no minimization on her part, but it just obscured the fact that I think a lot of Jews do consider themselves a race, and sorry that the Nazis consider them a race and a lesser race that need to be extinguished. She apologized. She went on Colbert and tried to explain herself better and understood and acknowledged that she was causing hurt and that she wasn't trying to cause hurt, all that kind of stuff. Was it like the greatest apology of all time? I mean, maybe it fell a little short of the greatest apology of all time, but I think it was a sincere attempt at an apology. She was willing to reflect and be introspective and, have more conversations.
She still doesn't get it. That's clear. But that's not a capital offense. She just doesn't get it.
I think she was still a little hung up on making that point, but she was also acknowledging, hey, I get it that's not the way other people see it.
Yes.
And she wasn't trying to be all like, I'm right, you're wrong, So,
I guess one of the problems is, okay, number one, Whoopi Goldberg's got to be 70 years old. When did Jumpin' Jack Flash or DC Cab come out or whatever?
Well, the thing that always all these heroes of ours in the 80s weren't all that much older than us when they became successful. So,
I mean, Whoopi's got to be, I don't know, we could Google it, but she's no spring chicken. How did and she's on a show. She's on a show every day where she opines about politics, which I think highlights the fact that these people, that this whole show, The View, is a whole bunch of people who don't always know what they're talking about, opining about things. I mean, look, people have gaps in their knowledge. I know I do, but that's a pretty big worldview blind spot for her to have. And she's on TV every day lecturing people about what they should believe and what they shouldn't.
I mean, you talk on TV radio that law, you're going to say something that's a misfire, and
not a misfire though. I mean, this wasn't misspeaking. She revealed a gap, I would say, in her knowledge.
Yeah, but I agree. But how serious a transgression is that, especially when she's willing to admit error and have further conversation about it. So. I don't think it warrants suspension. And in fact, I've seen all sorts of folks on Twitter, Jewish figures saying, I don't know any Jews that want her suspended. This seems really excessive. Yeah. That's why I wonder maybe that it might get walked back today or soon. But it definitely seems like an example of the TV executives being overly cautious and not wanting to be behind the curve on something, and overshooting the mark on their part.
Well, and David Frum has suggested a trade because someone who did misspeak is Ilya Shapiro. Did you see this, Bill?
Well,
Do you know
not only did I see it, Matt. Okay. And just so here's a conservative figure. He was at Cato. He got hired by Georgetown Law to be the dean of one of their programs or something. He just got hired, or he just started the job. And he made a crack about Biden picking a black woman for SCOTUS, saying the obvious pick is, I forget the person's name, but he's Indian American, if I believe, on the D.C. circuit. And he was like, this is obviously the most qualified person, and now Biden's going to pick a lesser black woman. And
but once again,
he apologized for
I mean,
it, but then George
this reminds me.
Just to do the background here. He did an apology. He took down the post. Georgetown Law said, we're going to suspend you, paid, while we investigate this incident. So he has said he thinks he's going to be fine because he didn't violate any of Georgetown's policies. So I had a piece about Bill Maher a couple months ago that you and I talked about. It went online at the Washington Monthly, got put into the print magazine earlier last month. And Bill Maher keeps saying controversial, obnoxious things, so I keep pushing it on Twitter. And so this one conservative guy who goes by Red Steez, you know what I'm talking about?
I think I've muted or blocked that person.
Yeah, Steven somebody.
Yeah.
He quote tweeted my tweet with some reference to Georgetown Law, which of course is not what Bill Maher did, the whole thing about Democrats sucking in regards to the infrastructure bill and crime in San Francisco and the pandemic. This is before this whole Ilya Shapiro thing even happened. And so he did the thing about saying, that sort of Georgetown Law, disproves me. And now I got this 24 hours of conservatives in my feed talking about Georgetown Law, Ilya Shapiro. And I'm like, what does it do to anything? And I even had a response to this Red Steez guy saying, since when did the DNC take over Georgetown Law? Because Bill Maher's talking about Democrats, not just rando progressives. And this isn't even a point that's that all his followers accept, because he was like, who are the people at Georgetown Law? I'm not going back and forth because I don't care enough, but just for our purposes, I don't give every single person at Georgetown Law is a Democrat. They don't speak for Democrats. Just like if there are 10 conservatives that do something, they don't speak for all conservatives. So clearly this is something that's really gone the right, completely, out of their mind outrage. They think it's indicative of everything they believe about the left.
Well, look, I think that person that you're referring to on Twitter is not a honest broker. But I do think there's questions out about cancel culture and free speech. And I think that just like Whoopi, said something that was wrong, but there really wasn't any malice involved. I think the same thing's true of Ilya Shapiro, who was making, I think, a valid, at least a legitimate point. You may disagree with it, but the point he was making is that, Joe Biden really is pushing the identity politics thing by pledging that he would pick a certain type of nominee based on race and gender. And Ilya is arguing, well, actually, there's a Indian American progressive who is actually more qualified. So by why not pick the most qualified progressive? Now, look, I don't know anything about whether this other guy that Ilya knows a lot more about the law and jurisprudence than I do. So I'll have to defer to his judgment. But it's not a racist thing he said.
Well, where it gets murky is the phrase "lesser black woman."
Yeah. Not a good phrase.
And but he might try to defend himself and say, I'm not trying to say that all blacks are lesser Indian Americans. I'm just saying that this other guy is so unquestionably the most qualified that anybody, black, white, Latino, whatever, would be lesser. But I understand why the words were misinterpreted, and I apologize. I took it down. I'm not saying I think it's a very good argument on the merits. The thing where I feel he proves the point of people who want to see a black woman on the court is this whole notion of who is the most qualified is not a quantitative objective measurement. And so often African Americans, African American women get on the short end of these so-called objective metrics because they haven't had the same opportunities for so long. So there's someone else on the D.C. circuit now. She just got there because Biden appointed her. She's been there very long. And the other guy's an Obama appointee, so he's been there for more years. So you can say, well, he is therefore more qualified. But of course, there were people who were on the court for a longer period of time. Amy Coney Barrett, she was on the court for very long. Was Ilya Shapiro complaining that, why didn't Trump pick X, Y, or Z? Why did he pick this white man or this Indian man or whatever who had more years in the court? He didn't do that. So why is he doing it in this case? Who's scolding Ronald Reagan for pledging to pick a woman during the 1980 campaign? Susan Collins pretending that didn't even happen. That didn't happen in the campaign, which it clearly did.
Well, no, I think Susan Collins, said Reagan didn't say this pick, my first pick, will be a woman. He said that my hope is that I'm going to name. I'm paraphrasing, but
he made a pledge
in my presidency.
He made a pledge in the campaign.
Yeah,
October 1980. He didn't say it would be my first pick.
Okay, well that's the difference.
That's a slight difference.
No, I think that's a big difference.
I don't think it's a big difference at all.
Look,
it was a campaign pledge to make sure women got on the court. If it's first, second, or third, who cares? He's making an identity politics decision to make it a pledge, not a maybe, not a hope, a pledge. By the only difference is that it was more of a guarantee that I'm not gonna jerk you around with it. I'm gonna do it first thing. That's the only difference. I mean, Collins on Stephanopoulos this week, ABC suggested that Reagan. The difference was that Biden said it in the campaign and Reagan didn't, and that's just wrong. Reagan did say it in the campaign.
Okay. I do think, though, you may not agree. I think it's a big distinction between saying, this pick, I am going to pick a black woman, versus saying, I pledge if I'm elected that I will nominate a woman to the Supreme Court. You know what I'm saying? Like that could be your second pick. How many did Reagan get in 2 terms? He got several.
Let me make a separate point here. Sandra Day.
But look, and I think, I've heard others, Charlie Sykes and Jonah Goldberg, other people have made sort of this point. But I think there's just a consensus among center-right folks that Biden should have probably picked an African-American woman, but he should have gone through this performative. This is sort of like the argument when Mitch McConnell said, look, we could have hearings with Merrick Garland and then vote him down. It's just better to not go through that charade. But I think that there was a sense that it would have been better to say, look, I'm going to pick the most qualified person. And then you pick an African-American woman who's going to be highly qualified. I think every person I've seen on that list is highly qualified. But to come out initially and say, I'm going to pick an African-American woman, this pick risks, first of all, it's sort of like nakedly political, because you're fulfilling a pledge you made in order to get the nomination. That did, Jim Clyburn delivered the nomination for Joe Biden in exchange for this pledge. And I think it also potentially denigrates the person who ends up on the court. It makes it look like they weren't necessarily the most qualified, when in fact, again, they will be highly qualified.
Let me say a few things. One, the notion that, well, if you don't make it plain and you do it kind of subtly, that makes everyone better off. I mean, I don't think that is necessarily a saving grace. And it's certainly not the case that the way Republican presidents have gone about it have been to ensure that you're getting the most qualified person. There is no argument that Sandra Day O'Connor had the longest resume of any option.
Well, look,
going
I wish Reagan had not picked Sandra Day O'Connor too.
Well, Clarence Thomas.
And I'm wearing
there's no argument.
I'm wearing an Arizona shirt as we speak.
There is no argument that Clarence Thomas was the most qualified person for the job based on resume alone when he was picked. I mean, he was barely on the court. He was like an Amy Coney Barrett. He was young. He'd been in the court for like a year and a half. There are plenty of judges who've been around for longer, but clearly want to have a conservative African American to replace Thurgood Marshall. They just didn't say it openly in advance. So I don't know if that means that you were not playing the affirmative action identity politics game. You most obviously are. Now, in this particular case, I think number one, there's always been identity politics on the court. You can say it's identity politics to have white men for 100 plus years solely.
Yeah.
That for a long time there was a wink wink Catholic seat and a wink wink Jewish seat. And then LBJ picked Thurgood Marshall and Bush picked Clarence Thomas. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was replaced by Coney Barrett. Sandra Day O'Connor. I mean, this has always been a thing. There's always been identity politics, period, in all of politics. You are trying to appeal to constituencies, and some people have identified with identities. And you appeal to Italians or Irish or what have you. It is nothing new. Now, the interesting thing.
Is it better? I would say there is an argument. Is it better to be honest about the transactional nature of politics and just be honest about it? Or is it better for it to be a wink-wink, to have a pretense that we're not operating that way? And in fact, oftentimes we do. Is there something to be gained from that?
I think it depends on circumstance. I mean, I think there's certainly times when someone getting a stigma of being an affirmative action hire undercuts them on day one, and then they have to overcome that, and that's unfair to them. In this case, well, I just went to a little backstory because I think it's an interesting backstory. Because not only did Clyburn tell Biden, this is in the run-up to the South Carolina primary, Biden hadn't won a primary yet. Clyburn saying, hey, I want to endorse you and get you over the finish line here, but you got to get a black woman on the court. You got to say that. And Biden said, sure. And then in the South Carolina debate, they're like 3/4 of the way through, and they've talked about the court, and he didn't say it. And they're in a break, and Clyburn goes to Biden and say, hey, guy, what are you doing? You're blowing this. You got to say this now. And it's literally like it's like one of the last questions, or like the last question, and it's nothing to do with the court at all.
Yeah. The good news for Biden.
What's that?
The good news for Biden is most of his answers are discordant.
Well, yeah,
and apropos of nothing. And so it didn't seem weird to me at the time.
But the question was, what's people's biggest misconception about you? And he is like throws in there, we're gonna have a black woman on the court, and the crowd goes wild. And Clyburn said, thumbs up. So he made the pledge. He made it bluntly. He repeated it over the course of the campaign. Nobody really complained about it in the campaign. I didn't see Republicans, crying their eyes out, how dare he do this? What was interesting to me in the campaign was that he did such a brazen identity politics maneuver without upsetting white people, without generating that kind of backlash, because Biden did enough other things. Yeah. To just, hey,
but I think he boxed himself in. I think Kamala Harris has been a disaster. I think he boxed himself in. I think I admire Biden for honoring his pledges and his commitments. I do. I think it was an indecent proposal. I think that Biden should have promised Clyburn that he would do his best and that he would always have his ear and that this would be but to make the explicit promise that will be your first nominee, will be that you are basing your selection on race and gender, to me feels unethical and inappropriate. Well, and it was a deal. This isn't, in the case of Reagan, I mean, I guess it was a deal he made with the American public, but he basically, Clyburn is like conditioning his support based on negotiating this deal.
I'm not saying it's hardball, no question. Reagan said it because he was getting hammered by Jimmy Carter as on the far right. It's like Carter basically, you may be through with me, but this guy's Looney Tunes. You don't want to go in with all the bigots and the sexists and the racists here. And this was Reagan's way of saying, hey, I'm not that guy. I'm going to put a woman on the court. It's all good, which worked. In this case, I think one of the reasons why I don't think it's going to be a net negative for Biden. Let me say two things here. One here, I think it is relatively more controversial now than in the campaign. One, because conservatives are making it controversial. They're introducing the element of controversy to it. If they didn't talk about it, it wouldn't even be a poll question that would be asked. But now we had the poll question. Now we're seeing 75%, don't want to do it this way. Second thing is that people are unhappy with all these other elements of the Biden administration. So It's not controversial initially because people are like, oh, he's going to do this, but he's not going to hurt me. It's not a zero-sum game. Yeah. Biden understands that we're the middle class.
Wait a second. That makes it less likely I'm going to be nominated for the court bill. Come on.
Right, come on. So I think Biden doesn't have the advantage of people feeling good about their lot in life now. So now this feels a bit more like an irritant to certain types of white voters. But having said that, because there are a good number of manifestly well-qualified black women options here. The person who is paid, no one's going to argue this person doesn't deserve the job. This person's going to be fitted within an inch of her life.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you pick somebody who's got a big controversy that gets dug up, that's another story.
Yeah. And it also doesn't change the structure of the court, the left, right.
I mean, we don't even, that's not even an issue here. So Biden's going to be able to say, not only did I make this pledge, but I did it in a way that ensured a qualified person got on the court. I'm not demeaning the quality of the court by any way. I'm proving that qualified people were getting shut out of the process before unfairly, and I'm fixing that problem.
Now, there is an interesting thing, though, that has to do with the who's qualified. And what does qualified mean? Because there's this interesting judge named Childs, I believe. Yeah. She is not an Ivy League judge. She's not Ivy League educated. She is supported by Jim Clyburn and, I believe, Lindsey Graham. Right. And so I think it would be super cool to have somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, I believe every Supreme Court justice either went to Harvard or Princeton, maybe.
I haven't checked it lately.
Anyway,
I think so.
They all went to some Ivy League school, like 9 of them, right? And the last time someone was nominated that was not Ivy League was Harriet Miers, and we know how that went. So on one hand,
Childs is a University of South Florida undergrad and with a law degree from University of South Carolina.
So we're talking about Marco Rubio sort of, educational background, which at one point I thought should be president. Obviously qualified, but again, a different sort of background. I would love to see someone who is not from an Ivy on the high court. And I think obviously Jim Clyburn has a lot of pull. And the idea of saying, okay, Lindsey, you have this advice and consent. Well, you've just given me your advice, and now I want your consent. There's the New Mexico senator had a stroke. Yeah. So he's out, right? So now Democrats.
We don't know if he's out. He's
out today. Yeah. But good point. Good clarification. He's out today. But wouldn't it be nice to know that this is going to be a bipartisan vote? I mean, I suspect there'll be several Republicans who vote for this nominee, whoever it is, barring some, huge scandalous revelation. But on the other hand, if you pick someone who's not Ivy, not in Ivy League, if the African American nominee is the only person who didn't go to an Ivy League school, then does that open the door for somebody, not me, from my Shepherd College days, but does that open the door for someone to argue that she's actually not as qualified as the rest of them?
I mean, I don't think the Ivy thing is. I mean, the thing about having an Ivy League credential is it gets used as a card to shut down any attack of this person's unqualified. Yeah. I mean, a conservative president wants to put a anti-Roe judge on the court. Boom, she's an Ivy Leaguer. You shut up. Don't you dare say she's unqualified. She went to this. I mean, Trump. I went to Wharton. Don't call me an idiot. I went to Wharton. So if that.
Amy Coney Barrett taught at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I know she clerked. Where did she?
I don't remember offhand.
Do we know? Anyway.
But that kind of thing gets used.
Whatever the case may be, certainly, I think she's Ivy League educated. But if she's not, if she's not, the rest of them are.
She's Notre Dame.
Oh, okay.
She attended Rhodes College, and then graduated from Notre Dame Law School, which is a very good law school.
Yes. Okay. So now we learned something. And so if you're going to comment and criticize us on the comments, caught it.
there's for a long time there's been this small corner of people that want to get away from always picking judges or even lawyers on the court. There used to be, more politicians on the court.
Earl Warren.
People who had other life experiences and would bring different perspectives, into the mix. But it's now become the attempt has been to make it seem like these people are above reproach because they're technocratic judicial specialists. I mean, Clinton wanted to do Mario Cuomo and Bruce Babbitt and got shot down. Bush tried to do Harriet Miers and got shot down. I mean, the reason, Harry Reid supported Harriet Miers in part because he wanted to see non-judges get on the court.
Yeah. By the way, she would have been also the only evangelical, right? Everybody on the court, I think, is Catholic or Jewish. Is that right? I think that's right.
That might be right. I know it's right.
What about Brett? What's Brett Kavanaugh?
I don't know offhand. Sounds Irish.
Well, he's probably Catholic. I think until recently they were all either Catholic or Jewish, and I don't know what Childs is, what her religion is, but or what any of that. That's actually something that maybe it's been talked about. I haven't heard anybody mentioning. We talk about race and gender, but I haven't heard anybody mention religion, which would potentially she could be bringing some diversity in that regard as well.
But I think Biden would like to have a few Republicans on board. I think he's probably going to get a few Republicans because, as you said before, it's not shifting the balance. It's really a free vote. Hey, I mean, Graham voted for Sotomayor. I think Kagan too. But he's always been the guy that I vote for the Democratic judges. I'm not a hypocrite. But now it's our turn. We get our judges, so you shut up. That's always been Graham's thing. So
pretty much the only exception would be Merrick Garland.
Well, even that, I'm not sure if Garland got a vote if Graham would have voted no.
True.
I think he was very happy for McConnell not to put him in that position.
Yeah. I think that's right. I just want to. This wasn't on the list I emailed you, but we should talk about Joe Rogan briefly. But before we do, I just want to circle back and say, because you said Graham, and I thought Graham Nash, and I think Graham Nash just pulled his music from Spotify. Yeah. That's what made me think of it. I just want to go back to Ilya Shapiro, which is like, I think he misspoke. I mean, I think he said something stupid, but there was no malice, there was no motive. He was clearly trying to say, in his judgment, as something of an expert, he wrote a really good book, I think called Supreme Disorders or something like that, which I highly recommend. That he believes that there was a more qualified or a better pick for Biden this time, which would have been an Indian American progressive man, and that he thinks that would have been a better pick. That's what he was saying. That's what he meant. I don't think that's racist. And I think that if people are grabbing the word lesser woman or whatever the
lesser black woman,
the word, what's that?
Lesser black woman was the phrase.
Okay. If they're grabbing those words, those very unfortunate words that do not sound good or do not look good, I think they are misrepresenting what he was attempting to say.
Well, I'm all for people getting second chances and apologizing and making amends and all. I mean, I'm not out for blood for Ilya Shapiro or Whoopi Goldberg or what have you. But I do think we have to acknowledge that they work for employers. And if there is legitimate concern that their continued employment is bad for the employer and that business, then they might have to get fired. I mean, if you can say all day long, he didn't mean it. But if Georgetown Law can no longer attract black applicants or other applicants who feel like the institution is now associated with racism because of Ilya Shapiro, and that hurts their bottom line, they have to take that seriously. They can't necessarily die on the hill for them.
You're very cutthroat. I would say
free market, baby.
I would say stand by your man.
Even means going out of business.
If you're a leader, well, I don't think Georgetown's going to go out of business. If you're a leader and you hire. This goes back to the Kevin Williamson thing at the Atlantic or whatever. You hire somebody, presumably, knowing what you're getting, and then something like this happens, and you're like, I don't think he meant it. I don't think, I think you should like stand by your person, like show loyalty to the person that you've hired, unless they actually say something legitimately bad. Like then they've sort of broken that deal.
Well, if you say something that can be easily misconstrued and makes it harder for the employer to do their business, I mean, that's a problem too. And you only live on principle for so long. If it starts cutting into your bottom line, people are going to make a move. So
you're a right to work sort of guy, like fire.
If people want to unionize and put a clause in their contract, this is why teachers have tenure in union contracts, mind you. It's so they can say things in the classroom that maybe parents don't like and not get fired. So, I mean, that's a legitimate thing to negotiate in terms of employment. But if you don't have that protection, then you might be subject to reprisal.
You could make a good. I mean, so Twitter is obviously very dangerous. Ilya Shapiro could attest to that. I don't think he would have written those words in a column, but with Twitter, it's spontaneous, and you've got a limited number of characters. It lends itself to this sort of mistake. And you and I even here, I mean, there's a danger. I'm not getting paid to have these conversations. And I could, potentially have said something 10 minutes ago that could get me fired. So like, I don't want to have this like chilling effect where people are like afraid to, engage in debate or argumentation.
When you work for somebody else and public reputation matters in the profession that you have, I mean, everybody watches what they say in all sorts of contexts. Look, but take an example of you were saying Kevin Williamson, you're hired for your opinions. The Atlantic hired Kevin Williamson because of the opinions that he produced, that there's a paper trail of. They thought he had the right kind of provocative style that was good for business. They wanted that kind of voice in their mix of writers. And then for them to say, oh, forget it. You wrote something that someone didn't like before that was not hidden, that was available to me to read before I hired you. I mean, that's more of a jerky move, and that might totally chilling effect. I mean, that in that sense, a writer might say, "Gee, if I write something that someone doesn't like, is Atlanta going to fire me now?" I mean, I'm not concerned about it from like a chilling effect in society. People can say what they want in society. Free speech exists, but I think an employer, anytime you're firing somebody for any reason, you send a message to that workforce.
Well, I tell you another sort of potential externality here is, one of the problems these days is that so many people on the right have decided to like check out of the mainstream. So in other words, it used to be you would want to like infiltrate the mainstream media, become a conservative voice at the Atlantic, and get a job at Georgetown University, And there is a movement amongst people on the right to basically say, no, let's build our own, alternative institutions, and that can have a siloing effect. And maybe it is what it is, but I do think that this sort of thing is sort of reinforces the idea, like don't even try to be a part of like their institutions. Like that's the old way. Forget it. Let's go start your own thing, or go do your own thing. Get on Substack, or whatever. Go to Hillsdale, which, by the way, I think is a fine school. And but there's a downside to that.
Well, if an employer is going to fire somebody, they're sending a message. They're sending a message to their workforce. They're sending a message to potential consumers that this is the values of the institution. And you got to do that knowing what the impact's going to be. If they want to say, hey, everybody works Georgetown Law, you better not traffic in controversial opinion on Twitter because we can't stand for that. It's going to hurt our bottom line. And we made Ilya Shapiro an example. And if you don't want to work at a place like that, then go work for Hillsdale. Go find some place to work. That's the way Georgetown Law, if that's their choice. They might say, mind you, in a few weeks, we checked this. It was a stupid tweet, and we don't think he's a bad guy.
What are they checking?
I don't know.
There's the investigation could take 5 minutes.
The investigation probably is, let's see if this blows over. Let's see if this is going to hurt our ability to attract students.
But that means the truth is that it doesn't matter the merits of Shapiro's argument of whether what matters is whether it blows over or not. So talk about such a spineless way to decide a human being's fate is whether the mob, let's go back to your haircut, Bill, whether the mob subsides and dies down or not.
As I say to my children multiple times a week, life isn't fair.
Fair point. Joe Rogan, Bill, there's a guy that I think is pretty close to being uncancelable. I mean, so obviously Spotify has decided that, Neil Young ain't a big enough problem to take down Joe Rogan. Now, I guess the question is, what happens if Taylor Swift decides that she's not going to stand for it, and it begins this cascading effect? But you know what? Joe Rogan is uncancelable in the sense that he has built this pirate ship, and if Spotify doesn't want him, he's going to go somewhere else. He's going to be fine.
I had a slight different reaction because I thought it was notable that Joe Rogan felt he had to modulate.
I disagree. I think that what Joe Rogan said was in keeping with his whole ethos. He didn't seem scared in that video he posted. That's kind of his mentality. He's really not an ideologue. He's just like, I don't know. I mean, so the video he put out didn't feel to me like he was backing down. It felt like that's what he does.
Oh, it's really short of backing down. And I didn't watch the video. I just read some of the quotes. But it seemed like his boss, the people who pay him, said, you got to put something out there to make it clear that you're not trying to put up misinformation, that you're going to be more careful, that you're going to, vet your guests better, He's trying to tamp it down. He's not saying, screw you, Neil Young, screw you, buddy. I can do what I want to do whenever I want to do it.
I know, but that's not what he would say anyway. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of his, but his reaction, the way he reacted, is the predictable reaction I think he would have. I don't go to Joe Rogan to get advice on whether I should get a vaccine or not. But when he has Quentin Tarantino on for 2.5 hours, and they're talking about, Tarantino's, filmography and IMDb or what, that's when I listen to him, and he's a good interviewer. He really is.
I'm always very torn to bring up Glenn Greenwald,
our friend Glenn.
But he had a Substack post, basically using the Joe Rogan example to prove that liberals want censorship. Liberals are just hungry for censorship and deciding what opinions are okay to say, what are not okay to say, and basically glorifying Joe Rogan for having the temerity to have all these different people on, regardless of their opinions on vaccines and whatnot. And I think that is an way overbroad charge. Now, mind you, there are people on the left and right that try to play the discourse patrol game and have for a very long time. We're currently in a moment where there are various conservatives trying to get various books pulled out of school libraries and school curriculums. But Greenwald is very touchy about progressives worrying about misinformation and disinformation in terms of, Trump and January 6th and in terms of the pandemic. And I'm not saying you can't have different opinions on this subject, but I think we should acknowledge this is a complicated subject because it is not a clear-cut, everyone should get to say what they want to say thing. Obviously, you shouldn't be punished. You shouldn't be punished by the government. You have freedom of speech to say nonsense things, to say wrong things. But from a public health standpoint, it is a tangible problem if a quarter of society has wrong information about vaccines because it doesn't just hurt them, it hurts everybody else. We can't stop variants if not enough people get vaccinated, and that not only hurts people getting COVID, but it strains hospitals and makes it hard for other people to get the medical care they need. So it is a true problem that's hard to solve within the confines of the First Amendment. I'm not saying we should suspend the First Amendment here, but it's not illegitimate for people to say, hey, private company, I'm appealing to you and putting pressure on you to do your civic duty so we can end this freaking pandemic and get back to normal life. So it's a hard problem. And the right and the value of a media figure to entertain a wide range of opinions, which I agree is generally speaking, a good value. It's good to have a wide exchange of ideas in the world. It gets really tough when you talk about public health when public information is so critical to having good public health.
One problem, though, is that, there was a time when if you had suggested that the lab leak idea, which now I think is very plausible.
Not proven. Far from
not proven. Plausible, maybe likely. But if you had suggested it, it would have been called a conspiracy theory or misinformation. Maybe it could have gotten you, I don't know, a warning or banned or something from social media. I'm not sure. And there have been a lot of things, don't wear masks, do wear masks. Oh, well, if you're wearing a cloth mask, it doesn't do anything. But if it's an N95, there's been a lot of stuff that if we get in the business of suppressing free speech, not only does that have ramifications involving, free speech, but it turns out some of the fringe, I think, for every 10 things the crazy fringe people say, one of them turns out to be true. You're going to be suppressing things that later will turn out to have been true. And that's very problematic. And so, look, my theory is, he's a comedian. He's a comedian and he's on a podcast.
He's not just riffing.
I don't go to Joe Rogan for my advice on whether to get a vaccine.
But some people do is the problem.
I know, but you can't. Being stupid is not a crime,
But if being stupid affects me and affects you, it's a different story. I mean, so it's quite complicated. And I think the lab leak thing is even a more challenging example. Because I agree with you. Could it be a lab leak? It could. And since I can't discount the possibility, I can't really slap somebody on the wrist for making the argument.
But they would have a year ago.
Well, where this got complicated is there was a push from people early on, led by the president, to make any possible argument to blame China. And that led to an uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes in America and perhaps elsewhere. I don't know the stats elsewhere. So these things had repercussions. Now, I'm not saying...
Trump makes up lies. Trump makes up lies all the time. And so why wouldn't this, if it's coming from like Tom Cotton or whoever, they've made up all sorts of lies all the time in order to advance their political agenda. Like, why wouldn't this one also be a lie, right?
So I think there was some hypersensitivity around it early on for concern it was causing anti-Asian sentiment in America. But I mean, it's almost like, you know, McCarthy, you know, there were some communists in the federal government. But that doesn't mean you want to have widespread blacklisting of people and people being drummed out of their jobs because they once worked for the Communist Party.
Or that he had a list of however many card-carrying member, you know, whatever he claimed at that speech.
So
that was bullshit.
So these things get fuzzy, and I'm not saying they're easy. I'm not saying that preventing people from airing an opinion is a reasonable goal here. But I think people like Glenwald don't try very hard to grapple with the complexities of these circumstances and the genuine motivations that people have that go well beyond like wanting, you know, greedy power for themselves or shut down other people's viewpoints. You know, there's genuine difficult issues here.
But I want to come back to the whole uncancelable thing because so there's a lot of interesting angles here, right? So one angle is we don't have a lot of reverence for it's a conservative thing to have reverence for people who were great once upon a time. Neil Young was great. And, you know, Graham Nash and so some of these people who are pulling their stuff, nobody cares though, right? Because our culture is not about reverence for the past or tradition. It's always about today and tomorrow. So that's one interesting angle. Even though they were, you know, even though the people were liberals, you know, like Neil Young, and in a way, this is we're seeing a conservative problem here that we don't have a lot of reverence for the greats. But if Taylor Swift and you know, modern day pop stars started pulling, you know, saying like to Spotify, like, hey, I don't want you to play my stuff anymore, they may have to eventually dump Rogan. But Rogan, number one, they would probably have to pay him some money unless they could prove that he violated their contract, right? And then Rogan just goes back to his own podcast and monetizes that and is still making a ton of money. Like I don't know what good this does.
Well, I mean, that latter point I do think is, I mean, again, difficulty with this issue. You know, Neil Young can say, well, I don't want to be on a platform that shares this insidious content, but you're not going to get rid of the content. Rogan's going to be Rogan somewhere, somehow, no matter what you do. He had plenty huge audience before Spotify. So this is the kind of thing where you have to, practically speaking, fight speech with speech.
Yeah.
You're not going to de-platform Rogan. But by the same token, what I said before, Spotify is in a business that is premised on appealing to everybody. If they only have like half the music in the world in their database, then they're not a successful company. Like they need to have as many songs in the database as possible so people can feel like I'm paying for access to all the music in the world. So they start losing names, then they have to ask themselves, hey, do I need this podcast to really make money here? So that's put them in a tough position because they want to appeal to everybody. That means appealing to a lot of niches, including like weirdo anti-vax niches. But they can't.
I would say, like, in fairness to Greenwald, who in some ways has been consistent in his liberal politics.
Well, civil libertarian politics.
Okay. So I remember the People versus Larry Flint, you know, and Howard Stern, and when Christian conservatives didn't like this content, we were told, if you don't like it, turn the channel. You don't want to get gay married, don't get gay married. You don't want you don't like Playboy or Penthouse, don't buy Playboy or Penthouse. Like, turn the channel. Like, that was a liberal thing. Well, and Bill Maher and Glenn Greenwald were probably espousing that when people like me were saying, like, what about the effects that this is the corrosive effects that this toxic stuff you're putting out there is going to have on society.
Well, I mean, the pandemic is not abstract. We are having a protracted pandemic because unvaccinated people are letting this thing spread and create new variants.
But there was a pandemic of immorality, Bill.
That's obviously that's much flimsier. It's much more flimsier an argument.
Well, I believe it's real, but it may be less tangible. But anyway, it's a similar argument.
I mean, there's some parallels there, but I think the pandemic example is much more concrete than like
the pandemic will kill you.
Your gay marriage is diluting my marriage is a weaker argument.
Forget the gay marriage thing. Let's go to like Larry Flint and Hustler and the sort of, diminution of values and all that.
Well, I mean, they're anti-hustler feminists who said this is objectifying women and corrosive to the culture. So there's more of a left-right horseshoe with stuff like that. But I think it's hard to argue that because it's so subjective what constitutes corrosive sexual content. There's that you don't want to get in the business of trying to draw those lines because they're impossible to draw.
We could start to get nuanced with the pandemic and whether the psychological effects that shutdowns have. Whatever. I don't know if we're going to solve the Joe Rogan one today.
Well, we should go. We probably talked for a long time. Let me just do a quick plug.
And we didn't even hit half the things that we were going to talk about. That's okay.
I got a piece up in the Monthly about Biden's messaging in the midterms, how it is contradictory. He's sort of caught between selling himself as the guy who made Washington work and brought back bipartisanship and the guy who could have done more if it wasn't for those mean Republicans. And I think he's got to pick a lane, and the bipartisan lane, to my mind, is the stronger lane for reasons which I laid on the piece. So check that out. What do you have to plug?
So my last two columns, The Beast, I had one, my penultimate column was about why Democrats and progressives like AOC, instead of trying to primary Sinema and Manchin, should be thankful for Sinema and Manchin, especially as you consider the lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court that now hangs in the balance with 49 Democrats as of today voting, being able to vote for it. So they should be thankful for Sinema and Manchin. And then my latest column is a look at what, in Watergate, ultimately, there was a price to be paid. Nixon paid a price. His chief of staff paid a price. Chuck Colson paid. People went to jail. G. Gordon Liddy paid a price. God rest his soul. So there was a price to be paid, and there's a danger, I think, now with Trump's comments about pardoning the January 6th insurrectionist rioters mob, that there'll be a moral hazard, Bill. We need to start holding people accountable, because if not, we're going to send a message. Oh, it's okay to try to overthrow the election. Go ahead and try to have a coup. Nothing bad's going to happen if you do that. I don't think we can send that message. So lock them up is the message that I'm sending, Bill Scher.
Well, I'll tell you, if you are a Democrat, progressive, liberal, Matt Lewis hater, trust me, you will like Matt Lewis's Trump January 6th column.
Oh, I like that endorsement. Thank you, Bill. It's good to have a friend. I don't have a dog right now. It's good to have a friend. Not to compare you to a canine, but they say if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. Because people don't like the hair. People don't like, the left hates me. The right hates me. There's like this sliver of warmth here in the DMZ.
I have a dog now, and she's barking, so I gotta go.
And you hate your dog. That's the problem.
Let's not go that far. It has proved more work than bargained for.
How about this? If Biden doesn't live up to his pledge, your dog gets it. Never mind the haircut. We're going to shoot the dog.
For you young people, that is a 1970s National Lampoon reference. That is not just only being cruel. He's actually referencing something.
Yeah. You have to be like at least 50 to get my humor and not cancel me. That's a problem.
All right. We'll talk soon. Are we zooming this week?
Yeah.
What's your deal on Friday?
I don't know, but I will say this. We didn't tape for a while, and barely anyone noticed. I saw you got a little guff on Twitter, but I gotta be honest. I feel that not doing this every week. I don't know about you. I feel more into this. I feel like we've had a really good conversation. So I don't know that we should tie ourselves down to, maybe we should see other people. Is what I'm saying.
Well, I'll ask the fans if you would be sad or relieved if we weren't going once a week. Let us know. If you really want us to go stick to once a week, let us know. Good information to have.
Yeah, I get to say personally, I feel like this was more fun than we've had in a while. And part of it is we didn't even get to half the stuff we're going to talk about. And we had stuff to say. We had stuff built up. It was like the old days. We've recaptured the spark, Bill.
Well, it's always sparkly to talk to you, Matt Lewis. So we'll figure out when we'll Zoom next soon. And otherwise, I will maybe next week, maybe not. Sometime soon here in the DMZ.
Hey, you get what you pay for, right?
That's right. Take care.